everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Grassroots Racer. This week, I speak to somebody who's always wanted to get into racing and started out in hire karts. Now, we know Rhodey for one thing, which is he loves to have a chat. So, I'm going to welcome Benjamin Rhodes tonight. How are you tonight, Benjamin? Yeah.
Yep, you got it right. I'm good, Ayrton. No, pretty good to be on. I've sat down and watched some of your podcast work, and you do a really good job with it. And pretty excited to have my chance to be on the in the spotlight.
Yeah, I really do appreciate you joining me tonight and having a chat about your racing career and what you've done outside of racing, but still being involved in motorsport. So, as everyone else did when they wanted to get into karting, they obviously looked at their options, and your option was hire karts when you were younger. How did that go for you?
Well, it actually started a little before the hire carts. I haven't got the exact timeline set up because it exists in a time before I have readily available email records, essentially. But about 2011, I think it was, I actually managed to, I'd say, con dad into buying me a race card. I got a Monaco GP6 with a KT100J. I know this because I still have it. And took that, I think, one run around primary school and maybe one run around my high school, just on basketball courts and the like. And was planning on going racing with it. And then Dad found church, which took out Sundays, and Sundays are kind of the race day. So that kiboshed that plan. But no, we kind of just sat around. I don't know what I did in the first part of high school, but got invited with a couple of mates to do high karting a couple of times, actually. And it's weird as somebody who owns the race kart, but the idea of high karting scared me in some way, and I don't know why. Took me 3 or 4 years with some mates from my second high school to bite the bullet and go, yeah, you know what? If they can do it, they're safe. I can probably have a crack. And I think my first best lap time around the track was a minute, and this is around a 40-second track. So I was not quick, and some would argue I haven't gotten much quicker. But yeah, started there and sort of tried to get the ball rolling again from there.
Yeah, though, to be fair, when I first started karting, I was at least 20 seconds off the pace. And then after a lot of practice, I did eventually catch up. So you did hire karting for a while. What were you doing in between that time?
So I started off with high karting, just doing it casually to begin with. I think I was just rocked up at a place. So I was running with some mates, and the owner of the track mentioned, or I saw it advertised somewhere, that they're doing a weekly series, which thought like a good opportunity to get into. I think it was a Thursday night series. So I got in there, went racing with some guys I still race with and know today, actually. And one of the meets, I ran into a guy named Brock Harvey. Now, for those that don't know, Brock is actually the guy that founded the sim racing league that Ed and I both run in, and we'll get into that later. But at the time, he'd set up a hire kart league. So I it was an interesting prospect because rather than running the same track for 10 weeks, which can get a little samey, every month or so we'd run it at all the different tracks around metropolitan Melbourne. So jumped in that for a bit. About the same time, I'd actually I only realized it again when I went back looking for stuff last night, but I'd actually had such a bit of an ego movement that I thought, yeah, you know what, we're going to have a crack at this real racing. This was back in like 2014, 2015. I went down to Borland Racing to get a quote for Formula Ford for the next year. And I think it worked out with the car included to be north of $100,000. And I had to very quietly backpedal on all my plans because that money was not going to be there. But no, I did the high karting, and then my next sort of move with the racing stuff didn't come until I got into TAFE.
So what did you study in TAFE, and what did that lead to?
I ended up going to Kangan, who have a campus in Melbourne, actually down near the Lynn Fox Car Museum, and did motorsports technology, which essentially is just a regular mechanic, but with finer tolerances, to ostensibly work on race cars. And they had partnerships at the time with, I think, ProDrive and Nissan Motorsport. So actually, one of my good mates from that course picked up placement at Kelly Racing and is still there now, I believe, as it's currently Grove Racing. He's been there for quite a few years now, but no, did a Cert 2 and then went into a Cert 3 and met a few people through that, actually, some of which I still keep in contact with, and they actually helped shape where I went for racing next.
Now, for those who don't know, Ben and I do race in the same league that Brock Harvey did eventually start. Does he have his own now? Was that T?
Anyway. So yeah, I can fill it in for you. Brock started what is now ASR. It was originally called AMS Oz. For those with a bit more detail, I'll give you a cheeky plug. Go back and have a look at the interview with Stephen DeVries. He went through a bit more detail on the sort of history of the group. But something that Brock started up. I actually was in the group mainly because he knew me through karting and just, I don't know, thought I'd be someone interested in sim racing. So I was in the group when it started, but I was just lurking quietly in the background. It was just a Facebook group at the time. I was just lurking there, just seeing what was happening. But coming through, I think it was about 2019, 2020, Brock then sort of spun off because AMS Oz was fully established by that time. There was a very strong, and there still is a very strong admin team. So he picked up TSAC, or started TSAC, which was the Touring Car Association Championship, which was essentially just a little subset for one make racing. And that sort of stuff. And I ended up getting the reins of that a little later, and we wrapped that up back into last year. But no, Brock's still somewhat very much involved. He's not had so much of an active involvement in the sim racing space now, but he does still pop up from time to time. I think he was running in one of our enduros last year, and he's still around every once in a while.
And you ended up doing Formula Vee, and what chassis did you end up purchasing?
So I was obviously back at the time. This was back in 2016. It's 2015 actually. I was still somewhat set on Formula Ford, and it took conversation with my TAFE teacher and also one of the students there, and her name is Amy Mueller, to maybe, not to not run Formula Ford, but to maybe run Formula Vee for a year or two first and sort of build the budget up and build the pace up. And so that if I'm going to flunk out, then at least I've done it in a cheaper category. Or if I'm not going to flunk out, or if I'm going to wreck a car, at least I've wrecked a cheaper car to then build up to Formula Ford when the budget and the driver skill exists, which, logical argument. So got to meet a couple of the V guys in 2015. Got a couple of track days at Sandown and I think maybe Phillip Island, and got to talk to a few of the guys and help them out around the pits. And I ended up buying it's a modified Elfin replica by a guy named Jason Coppard. It was, I believe, an Elfin replica through to 2004, but if you have a look on YouTube, there's actually a video of Jason rolling the car along the pit wall at Phillip Island in the end of 2004. Which was good timing from that point of view, because 2005, the new rules came in, which mandated, or not mandated, but allowed 1600cc engines. So that was a good chance for him to tear the car down and rebuild it. It became the Argonaut, which makes sense if you've heard of Jason. It's, I think, the Greek or the would be probably Greek or Roman legend of Jason and the Argonaut. So that's where that name comes in. And I picked that up in 2015. Had plans to run that as early as 2016, but again, like we mentioned with the Formula 4, the money just wasn't quite there. So sort of slowly built my way up and didn't get racing it properly until the end of 2016.
Now, a lot of people do struggle with this. Jumping from a kart to a car, it's a lot wider in a car. Your wheels stick out a lot further than your body. So did you have any trouble with spatial awareness, or did you pick it up pretty quickly?
I actually had spatial awareness troubles extremely early. And not in the way you'd think necessarily. The race car was my first time dealing with having a clutch pedal. And I'm pretty sure I've squashed at least one plastic storage tub in a garage because I've hit the brakes thinking this will stop the car and forgetting that I need to do the clutch as well. So the car just bunny hops its way into things and destroys things. No, I didn't actually have too much of an issue with spatial awareness. It was probably less because spatial awareness wasn't a thing. It was more because I wasn't driving the car as hard as I probably could have and should have, and racing as tightly as I should have. I didn't get racing really hard until sort of the end of my relatively short career, to the point where I was actually racing wheel to wheel with people. But you're right; it is definitely a different experience from a kart, even a higher kart point of view, where everything is within your point of reference. You sort of basically, wherever your body is where the kart is, give or take. So it's very easy to position yourself because it's not much wider than you sort of feel that you are. Like, you put your arms out and you're guaranteed to be out past the edge of the kart. So it gives you an idea of, just where you sort of your frame of reference you're working with. With a race car, it goes down past any of your legs one way, it goes your meter past your bum the other way. And in the case of an open wheelie, you then got another half meter or so out either side. You're good in a V because you sit high enough without being so high. I was still pretty high because I'm not really dimensionally suited for a race car. But I managed to sit high enough that you can just see the edge of the wheels. But yeah, knowing the wheels are there is one thing, and having the confidence to then, like I've seen some of the guys that have been doing it for years actually get to the point where they're actually sort of almost interlocking wheels at 150, 200 k's an hour, which takes some balls. But also they know exactly where their car is. Yeah, no, you're right. It is a thing to think about with the perception, because it is a step up from any sort of karting up to an actual race car.
Yeah, 100%. I remember in go-karting, you used to get tire marks on the side pods because of the rubbing, but in a open wheel car like Formula Vee, it's very tricky. And one thing I find difficult is you can see when someone's coming beside you when they're just in front of you, but when they're side by side, it's very hard to tell where they are. And, getting really close on, like wheel to wheel, is absolutely scary, but once you start to get your confidence up in the car and you get confidence for the people around you, I believe that it starts to get a bit better. And yeah, for tracks like Sandown, I didn't really mind battling and stuff because it was very open. I noticed, in a way, like there's lots of passing opportunities, where at Winton as such it's very hard.
Yeah, it's sort of, it throws you for a loop there, because Sandown does feel relatively wide in comparison to Winton's. A good example, actually. It's a really good track. It's definitely so more like a state series track than a full blown national series track. Though some of the national series cars, supercars, for example, are probably a little bit too fast around there. But it's quite good for the state series stuff. But no, there's definitely some points at Winton that are very firmly sort of one line corners, and there's the only sort of really big straight sections. The new extension, which is where the pit straight sits, and the back straight as it is. They're the only sort of good parts to really get comfortably side by side. In comparison to Sandown, Sandown's a really tricky place to race because the Armco is right there and you feel it. And if you've got the confidence, you're fine. If you don't, it spooks you a little bit. And I'll be honest, I was so slow the first time I raced at Sandown that I couldn't catch the field under safety car. So, and I'm not afraid to admit that was, I've come a bit from there, but yeah, that was a confidence thing. But other point, yeah, when your confidence is there, you've got so much space to race at Sandown because they're nice big long straights, they're nice big wide straights. It wasn't necessarily, well, I'm not actually sure what the racing Sandown was designed for, but there was a point where they held, I think they actually held one of the Australian Grand Prix there, if not holding Australian F1, which was F5000 at the time. And those are big cars, and you had those racing, 2 or 3 wide. So it's a good track for that. Nice big wide track. It's just getting the confidence up around there. But
Yeah, when I was running at Winton, and there was safety cars, with the engine as crook as it was and my confidence not very high because of it was in my car for the first time. Yeah, I remember I was barely catching the safety car, but luckily I had a 1200 near me, so it was like we were both catching the safety car. Um, but yeah, I remember the struggle, and Sandown was definitely a tricky track. Like coming down Dandenong, towards Dandenong Road, like a couple of times I spun in practice. Luckily not in the race though. Just yeah, one thing I did a lot was miss shift into fourth. I just find it a bit tricky sometimes, but definitely room to improve. And yeah, I really enjoy racing at Sandown. You can, once you stick the car there and the person knows you're there, you can have some really good racing.
yeah, like you're talking about misshifting. I had an incident in that same first race weekend where, again, lack of confidence. I very nearly popped the engine there and then. So I went from upshift at Winton, went from third to fourth. As I was getting lapped at the end of the race, and again, I was slow. And in my rush and slight panic, I pulled down to what I thought was fourth. But just before I let the clutch out, something in my brain went, hang on, your hand's a bit far over to the left for it to be fourth.
Oh, no.
Okay, let's make sure it's fourth. Back into neutral, roll it over. Yep, there's the high side. There's fourth. Clutch out. If I let the clutch out the first time, my engine probably would have gone something like, well, even 8 grand's a lot for a V engine. And I would have ended up with probably bits of a V parked just before turn 5 at Sandown. So, but no, Sandown's a really good place.
It was crazy though how quick you go down towards Dandenong Road and just getting that, like the left-hander, you want to end up just so you clip that right curb. And over the weekend, I was slowly hitting it more and more, and then the big dip down, and then shifting into third. Like, yeah, I just I found it really weird the first time because it was my first time in a V, and the only manual I'd driven before was my Hyundai. So, yeah, definitely tricky.
Yeah, that's the fun thing as well with getting into, and I suppose, any race car, because all of them at this point are some form of manual gearbox, and I hope they stay that way. But like my first experience with a manual gearbox wasn't until I did my driver's test, which I did in 2016 up at Marulan, actually, which for those that don't know, it's now called Pheasant Wood. It's a track in country New South Wales, which is a bit far from Victoria, but scheduling meant that was my best option. That was my first time driving a manual competitively. I'd done it maybe one other time with a family member's car.
Now, what did you do after Formula V?
So after the V's, actually, it sort of started during the V's. I'd made contacts with a few people in my hard karting days. I still hire kart semi-infrequently. It's just where the money is at and a couple other things. I think I did a couple of races last year, actually, in between all the lockdowns. But one of the guys I met was dating a media student at the time. They separated. A little later, I became friends with her, and I helped. Oh, I'd say I helped. It was her effort. I just did some of the back end for her, but I helped her set up VATtrack Media. Her name's Miranda. She does a really good job with VATtrack. It's a team of, I think, 6 or 7 people. Like I started with State Series Racing. They've now gone on to do, I think they've done like some TV commercial work and that sort of stuff. Haven't seen them around much in the last little while, but again, the racing's been very much on again, off again, and it's hard to reliably commit to that sort of effort that they put out. But I started with them and actually had Miranda on doing my photography for the second round of the State Series. And as the year progressed, I sort of got a bit more involved with VATtrack. I actually did some photography for them. There was the first Aussie Driver Search Victorian qualifier at Sandown in 2017. I photographed there. I also photographed at a Impreza Club show and shine, which was pretty cool. I got some good photos there.
Yeah.
But most of that year I was still racing, so that was my focus. I'd actually started photographing a little while before. First major event I did was I did my first and only Bathurst in 2016. I ended up taking my camera to that, and I've still got to sort through those photos, and a lot of them are very average compared to my standard today. But 2017 ended, 2018 started. I had a separate endeavor, which took up a lot of my time through that year. But in the background, got into the photography stuff, covered a very wide range of events in 2018. I think I did all but one round of the State Series due to my other commitments. Also did all of the supercars points paying rounds. I was at the Grand Prix, but didn't photograph the supercars because on-track photography is it's essentially impossible unless you're one of the pros. Then through 2019, 2020, and I think as of this year, Rhodey's Photos has been going for 5 years.
That's incredible. And when do you plan to do your next event?
It's a tricky one for a couple of reasons. I haven't been able to do much photography in the past 2 years. My last major event swing was the start of 2020. With the first round of the State Series at Sandown, and then I think within 2 weeks I had the Filippin Classic, and then the Thursday of the Grand Prix. And I go Thursdays because it's cheaper, not because that's potentially the reason I go, because it's cheaper and there's less people. It turns out that was a good decision because that was the only day of the Grand Prix that went on in 2020. So I've got photos that potentially some people might not have. But outside of that, I in the off season, sort of in 2020, I actually had done a little bit of a handshake agreement with one of the Formula Vee teams to sort of do some photography for them. So only stuff I've done since then is a test day and a couple of test days over sort of summer of 2020, 2021. And then a show day or something of the sorts in, I think, April last year. In terms of what's coming up, the way things are looking, I might be back at the next state series round, which I haven't been to a state series round for, 2 years plus now. So to be honest, I'm not sure I'm out with photography. It's one of the things where the act of doing it has kept me going, and having 2 years off, it's sort of put it out of the frame of reference for my mind. But at the same time, I'm just going to get back to the track and talk to people and talk about race cars again.
Yeah, 100%. And I enjoy seeing the photos that you're taking me in August at Sandown, back in the Formula Vee. But what have you been sort of doing in that time with sim racing?
So I actually sort of got into the sim racing as sort of like a tit for tat deal. I'll go back one step further and talk about the thing I mentioned earlier, which is at the back end of 2017, alongside the photography, I started a commentary team. Initially, I brought in a mate named Saron. Don't talk with Saron much anymore, unfortunately, but in terms of talking about race cars, he can talk till the cows come home. So he's sort of very well base equipped to be a commentator and talk about race cars, and he did a good job of that. And then Hans Brunswick, who's a mate of both you and I, he was the second guy that came in. I actually met him, like, I didn't even go looking for him. I just ran into him at a Melbourne Performance Centre open day. Then dragged him down, offered him a chance to come and commentator in the, but then into 2017, the momentum picked up with that. I actually, we talked about Stephen DeVries earlier. I actually had him for his first IRL commentary appearance at Winton in 2017, which only came as a result of the sim racing, actually, because I was in the group. I'd seen some of the broadcasts and had a chat to, the sort of head admin, or at least the person I knew at the time, which was Brock Harvey, and said, look, Brock, have you got any commentators? It's short notice, but you've got any commentators from it? And Stephen, or Nether as we know him, was free. And but from there, the rest is history. And a couple of years, 5 years later, he's now working with Blendline and with PyArc. And I can't exactly have a dad moment because he's not quite dad age compared to me, but he's older than me. But having a bit of that cool race dad moment when I see him out there. Eventually got to like a team of, I think, 10 people by round 5. We had Stairs in, who's used to broadcast some of the AMS Oz races, and also had Bagsy in, who commentates GD3 with Nether. And unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. No, sorry, back in 2018, Stairs did me the reciprocal and actually invited me to commentate with him in his sim racing league, which is called Apex Rear Wing. It's currently dormant, but they ran weekly on Wednesdays. I think I started on streaming. I started with a forget the word for it, but I was running a Windows emulator on my Mac Mini, so I could get Steam running, so I get AMS running. I had it running with, I think, 2 cars visible, and the rest of them were just bits of cars floating in the distance, and the graphics were terrible. But that's where my sim racing commentary debut started, and that's what got me into sim racing. And then so from 2019 onwards, I've been running here in what is now ASR, and also in a few other leagues.
Yeah, and you're also doing the development series.
Super 3 is actually pretty competitive. It doesn't always look like it at times, but my teammate Cracker's pretty quick. We've also got Mike Coulston in there. He's pretty quick as well. And Bailey Hall, he's floated around the sim racing scene for a few years, but he's finally popped up again. He, in his first round, 2-3 weeks ago at Winton, he kept me extremely honest all 3 races. I won 2, he won 1. He's a few races or a few rounds behind me on the points, but if he has some cracking rounds and I make a faux pas, he's still a threat as well. So it's really good racing. No, look, I'm really happy with how I'm going in Super 3, and actually taking it further, you're racing in Super 2 as well. And you're racing sort of under the wide umbrella of the team that I've been looking after for the year, and just generally the team that I've got, what are we now, like 10, 11 people?
Yeah.
Thanks to your brother now jumping in. Everyone's doing a really good job. We got, people up the front chasing with championships and teams championships. We got guys that are out there just getting PBs. I think one of our drivers, Zach Brown, got his first win at Winton last round out, and he was over the moon with it. So that's pretty good. And then obviously you got yourself and Justin Cecil as development drivers for Luke's team, Lockie's team. And I don't necessarily, it's an interesting debate on where sim racing fits compared to real racing. It ticks a lot of the boxes of real racing, especially nowadays with some of the leagues getting big and the politics coming into it, which is something we'd like to keep out of racing, but politics is a thing in racing. And I've faced plenty of it in the real racing, and I'm facing some of it in sim racing. So it's modeling that pretty accurately. But there's only a few things that sim racing can't do nowadays, and it's replicate the feeling of actually being in the car itself, and some of those feelings that you only get from being in a car, like the motion of the car, and when you're in an open wheeler, just the wind buffeting past your head at 150 k's an hour. That stuff the sim can't really do for you. Outside of that, though, it's getting pretty immersive, and it can be as immersive as you want it to be, pretty much, and just a really good accessible form of racing. I mean, I don't often do it, but I don't need to put on a race suit when I go sim racing. I can do it in my PJs if I really want to. So that's a really good accessibility part of the sim racing aspect.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Rhodey. And well, I think we should quickly talk about your journey in the Aussie driver search.
Yeah, so I actually started with the I knew the guy behind Aussie Driver Search before it was actually Aussie Driver Search. It was back when it was the Pulsar Driver Search running in New South Wales. I mentioned Marulin earlier, and that was, I went up there to meet Kyle Austin. Now, if you've been around Australian motorsport for a few years, you might recognize the name. He did go on to found Aussie Driver Search, which ended up wrapping up in
2017.
not the well, it was in 2019. What I was going to say, it's not the cleanest circumstances in 2019. No, I met him back in 2016, back when it was just a little thing for to get people to drive in the Pulsar series. And got chatting to him throughout my driver test. Ended up lapping around Marulin in like a road license testing Ford Fiesta, so double pedals. But you know what, a Fiesta is probably about the biggest sort of car you want around Marulin. It's essentially like an upsized kart track. So sort of kept in contact, and then he set up Aussie Driver Search in 2017. Sort of knew him and managed to get an in there for VATtrack through myself to do some photography for him in 2017 at Sandown, and through that got to actually meet Simon Fallon, who's now he's run a few different things. He's currently in the Carrera Cups. He came there he did some historic racing. He was trying to get in the 86s. Really quick operator, really sort of professional operator as well. And he's a good guy. I've caught up with him every once in a while. Did the 2017 event with them, and then 2018 came back as sort of Rhodey's photos and did 2018. That was actually a good event because that was down at Phillip Island, which I prefer as a photographer because there's so many more angles you can get at Phillip Island. Except being Phillip Island, it was cold. And I actually had a couple of my mates down there running in it. I had Hans, I mentioned earlier. He ran in the Audi R8 GT3. One of his mates actually put a video together for it, and like Hans is somebody that can talk racing but actually knows his way around racing. He's the sort of driver you'd probably want as an engineer, because like I've been with him in supercars paddocks, and he's had Super 2 engineers looking for the book of terms to find out, exactly what Hans is asking, because Hans knows what he's on about. He doesn't have a career in motorsports. He should, have a position of someone, say like a Noons or something like that, or I forget on top of my head who it is who does some of the real deep dives in supercars, but that sort of role would really suit Hans. But he knows his way around racing. He did supercars commentary with ASR for a few years. He's now actually racing in it, which shows sort of where his multi-talented facets are. But he ran the R8, and Steve DeVries ran I think the 86 and might have been a Pulsar, and I think later then went to the final and ran the V8 Ute. But I got to photograph there. That was good, actually. Got a good bit of sort of a loop in with the guys who were running in the event. Actually had them coming back to my page looking for photos, which boosted the numbers quite well, which was handy. Went down in 2019 when the first round of the Super 3 series, which was the Kumho series that was
Yeah.
on, and they had Matt Powers running in the FG.
Oh, wow.
And he's, for those that don't know, he came across from America to win Aussie Driver Search in 2018, which, I can see the arguments about, an American winning what's meant to be an Aussie
Yes.
competition being a bit of a funny thing. But at the same time, he was the best person there, and he was committed to come down and actually race in Australia. So it was something like he probably wanted to run supercars and just needed a way in. He'd already been doing a bit of club racing in the States. It was a really good part of the life to be a really good sort of part of my life and to be a part of it, even on a sort of fringe capacity. And that's sort of been the last time I was actively pursuing race cars. But I still want to get back into a race car every day.
Yeah, 100% ready. I see where you're coming from, and I really do appreciate you joining me tonight. It's been great having a chat like this, and I do look forward to seeing you in August at Sandown, and hopefully you get to meet me and in real life, not over Zoom and stuff. But yeah, I really do appreciate you joining us, and remember, everyone, drive fast and take chances safely, of course. Thanks, Rhodey.
All good.